Hello guys, so in this video, we'll be looking at 6 different ways of how we can improve our Logic's performance. Let's get started. So the first way is to increase our input and output buffer size in Logic Pro. The input and output buffer size is basically temporary audio data stored in Logic which is later on sent to various parts of your Mac. So to increase the I/O buffer size, go to Logic Pro, Preferences and then Audio. Here under I/O buffer size, you'll see number of samples. Right now set to 256. This is basically the number of samples Logic stores in the buffer before it sends it out to various parts of Mac for processing. So by increasing these samples to 1024 or 512, you basically increase Logic's performance and also the CPU performance of your system. But also you have something called latency. Latency is basically the delay between your input and your output of your sound card. So the higher the samples, the higher the latency. So what happens with latency is when you play a note on the keyboard, there will be a considerable delay between the time you play the keyboard and the time you hear it back on your speakers or your headphones. So to avoid that when you're programming, try to keep your samples to 256 or even 128. But when you're mixing or even recording, you can go up to 512 or 124. This will hugely increase your CPU performance. So the next way to increase our CPU performance is to use something called freeze tracks in Logic Pro. Freezing tracks will bypass the plugins and VST instruments in the track. Logic will convert this track into a temporary audio file and then render it back when you play back your project. This reduces the CPU load because Logic bypasses all the plugins and VST instruments that might be overloading your CPU. So to access freeze tracks, just go to any track, right click, go to track header components and then go to freeze. You will see all the tracks has been added with this extra icon of snowflake. So to freeze a track, simply engage the freeze option and then press spacebar. Logic will render this audio file in the background and then play it back for you. The only problem with freezing a track is you will be able to hear back the audio file, but you won't be able to edit the region, both audio and MIDI. For example, if you try to edit this region, it will say current track is frozen, do you want to unfreeze it? You will simply have to click on unfreeze to unfreeze the track again. And then once you want to freeze it back, just click on the icon again and then press spacebar. So right now you can see my plugins have been grayed out and there's a small icon that indicates this particular track has been frozen. So the next way we can increase our CPU performance is to bounce and place some of our MIDI regions. For example, I have a MIDI region here which I'm quite happy with. Once I'm happy with the MIDI region, I can just go ahead and bounce that in place as an audio file. To do that, just click on the MIDI region and then click on bounce in place. Here I'm going to name it as load drums. And then on the destination, I'm going to select new track. And then on the source, I'm going to mute the source. And then normalize, I'm just going to say off. So now that I have bounced in place as an audio file, I can just go ahead and then bypass my VST instrument. In this way, I can decrease the CPU load from my contact instrument. So another way to increase our CPU performance is to use auxiliary synths for our time-based effects like reverb, delay, etc. A lot of times I've seen people using multiple reverbs on various tracks. What that does is it creates a lot of CPU load because a lot of those plugins take up your CPU resources. Instead of adding reverb and delay to each and every track on the inserts, create an auxiliary track by going to the mixer window and then go to options, create auxiliary channel strip. And then on my auxiliary channel strip, I'm going to first select the input as bus 3 and then name this as reverb. And on the insert of this auxiliary strip, I'm going to choose a reverb and then increase the level. Now I can send multiple instruments to this particular auxiliary strip. For example, I can send this one and this one, then increase my sends. So in this way, you can add just 1 or 2 reverb and decrease your CPU load. So another way to increase your CPU performance is not through Logic, but rather stopping all the background applications that you're not currently going to be using when you're producing music. Like for example, if I go to my Spotlight and then type in Activity Monitor, and it shows all the applications that's running currently. So let's click on CPU percentage, and this will show you the apps that's taking the majority of your system resources. And you can close a lot of these and free up some of your system resources. Like for example, I'm not using Adobe Photoshop right now. So just select that and then force quit that. And the same way, I'm not going to be using Google Chrome. So I'm going to close that as well. So by closing all these background apps that you won't be using when you're producing music, frees up a lot of your system resources. So guys, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, give the old thumbs up. And if you're visiting the channel for the first time, do consider subscribing. I'll see you soon on another new video. Until then, take care and bye.